Welcome to the Peaked podcast, where I talk about gender identity ideology and other bad ideas, women's rights, and free speech from a European point of view. Kathy, Sean, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Hey, Roshi. Hey, Sean.
Grand. We are recording. We are having a watch party tonight. And the reason we're doing a watch party is because there has been a little development in Irish turf trans land, which is that our VIP Nickerhun, Donald Foy, has not died, which I expected him to do any day now and have a parade in his honor. But instead, he's had a little short film made about his life. And this bothered me because Donald Foy has been lionized as this civil rights hero. And I don't think that's really the full story. For years and years and years now, Irish people have been bombarded with the story of Donald Foy. They call him Lydia Foy. That's what he changed his name to. And he's an old man now, but there was a time when he was a young man. He was a run-of-the-mill transvestite crossdresser, and he was sort of taken up by the free legal aid service in Ireland back in the 90s because he wanted to change his legal sex. And we're going to get into that story, but essentially, it's not even about why I'm so infuriated or why I was so wound up by this new short film that's been made about Donald Foy is not necessarily just this one particular transvestite. It's about the way his story has been treated by the media since forever. This story is very much a media story that was sort of created by the NGO sector in Ireland in order to advance this legal gender recognition, which we eventually got. So we're going to try as best we can to tell the real story of Lydia Foy, Donald Foy. And we're going to start by just watching the film that was made. Now, this film was released like last week or 2 weeks ago or something. It was made by an Irish production company and it was paid for by Irish taxpayer money. You'll be absolutely shocked to learn. So it was Fee Sharon or someone who paid for it in a collaboration with Virgin Media. So we're going to watch it. It's only 12 minutes long, but I did see on its IMDb page that this seems to be a pilot. So it says it's a pilot. So if I understand film nerd words correctly, that means that like the idea would be eventually to turn it into a multi-part series. Is that what that means?
Yeah, that is what it means. But I mean, if it starts and ends, they might go on to a different character who's, make a lot of propaganda about them.
Hopefully
By
it's
like
called Lydia though.
it could be just like American Horror Story. They give it a name for season one, then season two would have a different name. It might work that way as a pilot.
And you don't know, Roshi, I wonder could it be that, because I think from seeing it briefly, the film starts in 2007 when he actually won his case. Whether they intend to go back maybe, because it's fairly late in the day when they start off with the film, so whether they intend to go back and maybe do a showing of the retcon childhood, everything, who knows?
Well, that would be funny because as we're going to see when I put it on, it is one very small snapshot of the Donald Foy story. And I was thinking when I saw it first, this is funny that they're not telling his story as a young person or whatever, because it's all just so incriminating. And when I say incriminating, I don't mean
It's
what
not
do I
this
mean?
illusion that he's some little civil rights warrior.
Yeah, I mean, in all likelihood, he's got a bit of the autogynephilia. He's a sexually aroused fetishistic crossdresser, or at least that's how his journey, his gender journey, as they call it, started out. And that's the part that's always hidden. And that's the bit we never ever talk about. And when I say, and so I mean, my whole goal in basically everything I do is I just want people to know that's the root of what these men are up to. And so to see it turned into a civil rights story is just really annoying. And so when I say, like, of course, they're not going to show his gender journey from his early years because they would have to really retcon it because he started off trying on his wife's clothes, as they all do. So anyway, think whatever you want about cross-dressers, transvestites, whatever. It's just to juxtapose this slot, whatever it is, with what is the much more likely trajectory of Donald Foy's early years. So I'm just going to stick on, and then we can talk about the court cases that led up to it. So let's go.
Dr. Lydia Foy and for legal counsel have
I thought I told you.
Yeah.
And this isn't the first time Dr. Foy has faced the High Court. Their initial appeal was denied 5 years ago by the same justice who presides over the verdict here this morning.
I solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare that the evidence I give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
After 6 months of a lengthy deliberation, Dr. Lydia Foy is returning to the High Court. Burley.
Dr. Lydia Foy and her team will hear the outcome of what has been a historic case.
Court is now in session. I don't like the back Dr. Wiener. This was like saying herself. That's the way.
Please, be seated. On the 9th of July 2002, this court gave judgment in the first set of proceedings between Dr. Lydia Foy and the Registrar General. The results of this hearing followed the re-entry of the proceedings under the European Convention on Human Rights Act 2003. 6 months ago, this court was asked to reconsider whether the state's failure to provide legal recognition to Dr. Lydia Foy infringed on her rights under
The eyebrows are a choice, aren't they?
Convention.
Yeah, they're like big slugs on his face.
And that actor, he's a very beautiful man. His eyebrows are like that. I think it's just with the blonde wig is hardcore.
That's what I was thinking when they were saying that it's nothing but the truth. It's like, hang on, if they were going to do a real depiction, it'd be a middle-aged bloke, not some twink.
Do you know the real story of St. Patrick?
Well, sure, he threw all the snakes away.
There were no snakes. There's never been any snakes in Ireland. The snakes are like a metaphor, I suppose, for
What's in your job?
pagan ideologies in the 5th century. The real St. Patrick didn't do much good at all.
No, I come the name of a saint then.
And really, he's responsible for erasing the indigenous Irish spirituality.
On his own.
You can't underestimate the power of one man, Michael.
It's not right.
Good point there.
Do you not think
Yeah.
Coast to Earth to bring peace?
I'd support him for talking shit about St.
Bring
Patrick.
peace.
Oh, this.
Sword. It was denied.
And what was the reasoning given in the letter addressed to Mr. Farrell?
That they had no power to amend the record, that there was no mistake, and the application was refused.
At this stage, Miss Foy, how many years is it since your initial appeal to the Registrar General to update your sex from male to female?
I first applied to update the record in no, it couldn't have been then.
Dr. Foy, can you not speak with any certainty?
I can, just give me a moment.
Then why the confusion?
You can't be serious. Give her a moment to think.
What is the point you're trying to make, Mr. Anderson? I'm just trying to draw to the court's attention that this isn't the first time that Dr. Foy has confused events.
Excuse me,
Miss Foy.
are you accusing me of being dishonest?
Yeah.
We are.
Highly accurate.
And this is probably the only, sorry, I'm going to pause it. This is like the only true part of this reenactment, I think, is that he sounded like he was a total prick throughout proceedings, because as we're going to find out, Donald Foy is a very aggrieved and narcissistic individual. And so I think this part probably does reflect like the stopping and starting, the judge having to reprimand him for being such a dickhead. Anyway,
Now, I do wonder why the play and he gets confused. Is it because if any inconsistencies come out later, it's just dismissed as confusion? It's just a funny thing that struck me.
what do you mean? Oh,
Yeah, like, I mean, it's nothing to be confused about if he was in court. It always seems to be part of the whole poor Lydia because they're confused about something, so can't be held to account for any inconsistencies.
right. Yeah. And at this point, we'll go through the timeline after. But at this point, was he still claiming that he had a congenital handicap from birth? Like, was he? Because in a recent interview, he called himself disabled. His disability when referring to his quote unquote transsexualism. So I wonder, is he? I don't know. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to know if they've actually made 10 of these and they're just trying to, this is just the one that they're trying to sell and it links into the rest of the story. Yeah. Anyway, okay, let's keep going.
It is years since Miss Foy first attempted to amend her birth certificate and was refused. Can we let that sink in
This is
for a
better.
moment, ladies and gentlemen? Looking year after year after year of basic human dignity denied.
Human dignity for a cross-dresser. Okay.
Ms. Foy, could you explain to the court in your own words how this decision has impacted you?
Michael Farrell's played by a cutie as well, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Handsome lad.
Which one?
To hit her lawyer,
Waiting
the main one. He's cute.
a bus that never arrives.
The metaphor is amazing. It's like waiting for a bus that never arrives.
The timetable tells you it'll only be another 5 minutes.
Stretch is only 5 more minutes.
So you wait.
Idiot.
You think to yourself, oh, well, sure, look. What's another 5 minutes? Then an hour suddenly passes by.
It's like a lion
And you're
Steve
stood there.
Well, I was thinking that setting, well, if you just like have a look at the setting, it's institutional old Ireland sort of setting, isn't it? And the
is.
hallway. It's like it's supposed to
Funny that, isn't it?
remind you this is real like Sisters of Mercy hallway in a still, isn't it? I wonder
love
if that's
those.
delivered.
Yeah.
To show you that like Ireland's moving on from this old like I mean we're literally talking about
Will find
a
that the Registrar
transvestite.
General does not deny the sincerity of Dr. Foy's circumstances.
I'm sure.
Dr. Foy, please refrain from commenting while the respondent is speaking.
The issue is not about personal feelings. It's about constitutional movability. There exists no basis within Irish law to permit an amendment in
Can I say something?
on the grounds of transsexualism.
Is that not the entire reason for us being here, to explicitly counter that immovability?
They're just going around in circles.
Justice Doherty, Ireland is falling drastically behind its European counterparts, not least in recognising transsexuals as equal citizens under the law.
I thought.
Wouldn't want to fall behind international standards, would you?
Enough. I intend on dismissing this court until each of you can conduct yourselves in a manner of respect. I understand there is the intention of presenting new evidence to the court.
Yes, we have a new...
I am addressing Dr. Foy, Mr. Farrell.
In light of the not so recent Goodwin ruling,
I will give you 15 minutes to decide on whether you want to proceed.
Justice, with respect...
Once again, Mr. Farrell, I am addressing Dr. Foy.
And we are her counsel.
You may not consult with your legal counsel. I am reminding you that you are under oath. The choice is yours alone to make. Court dismissed.
Michael, what's happening? Michael.
Do you mind making your way to the gallery for me, please?
Michael.
Sir, please. Thank you.
Michael, what's happening?
Ah, God.
Dr. Foy? Dr. Foy, would you like to come with me, please?
Hang on.
It's okay. This way. Dr. Foy?
God, it's clever. Restart Roisin, I find it hard to believe that a situation like that would have happened in court, where a judge is telling somebody that they can't talk to their counsel. It seems very bizarre.
Mm-hmm. Is that Judge McKechnie? Keckney? Is that him?
I think it was, but it was referred as Donaldson, I thought.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so maybe not. We'll go into who those people are in a minute. Yeah, it's very much, this very short film is very much designed to make you feel sorry for this poor individual. It's all there, isn't it? The emotion, it's very emotional.
Ribbon on the glasses and all.
I mean, the filmmaker is obviously very talented. I think. I mean, I don't know anything about film actually, but it's well made and well acted. He's a great actor, this lad, who actually pretends to be a woman in real life. He's a man who pretends to be a woman, pretending to be a man, pretending to be a woman. True and squared. His name is Lilius, which is a very common Trin name, no?
I think
The
that
actor.
yeah, I did look him up.
It looks like it was probably Liam originally or something. And we agree, Sean, he's a gay lad. No, he's not an AGP. Do we think?
The actor, I'd say, is gay, yeah, but Lydia Foy wasn't. He's a straight, middle-aged bloke in this scenario, so it's so manipulative.
What age was he supposed to be actually in this in 2007?
He was 60.
60 in 2007.
And they've got this fella in his 20s, like, oh, it's a bleeding joke, like.
And just have a look at Michael Farrell was about the same age. You look at because there is actually a picture of Foy and Farrell leaving the court. When you look at that versus the actors, it's
I
quite.
have that photo. I'll put it in the article that goes out with this. Yeah, I mean, artistic license, whatever. But it's funny because I always, when I first discovered what all this trans stuff was about, I found it funny that Orange is the New Black. They had the famous Laverne Cox, who was the trans woman in the prison. When they told his backstory, he was married to a woman. So his backstory had the AGP backstory, but he was an actual effeminate gay man.
Mhm.
And it was funny because, yeah, and now you have Lydia Foy is being played by a twink. And he was actual, like, yeah, he was a straight, I'd say quite autistic, classic AGP type. Anyway.
Everyone, as a member of Irish society, has the right to human dignity.
This is insane. This is an insane thing to say in the context.
Subject to only the most minimal of state interference.
No, state interference, and they'll lock you up for saying that and about it. Like,
Yeah.
Continued absence of legislative action to amend a person's gender.
my God, the injustice of it.
Gender has been legally reassigned.
Jesus, what does that even mean?
Constitutes a breach of Article 8 of the European Court on Human Rights.
And just to hammer this point home again and again and again, even though it gets made all the time on social media, the breach of the Convention on Human Rights, the breach is the right to private life. So the argument was it's a breach of someone's right to privacy to make them have on their legal documents the sex that they are, just so we're all clear. And that's the grounds upon which all these cases were won, was privacy grounds. So that's why it's being repeated here, as if you can't tell by looking at Donald Foy what sex he is.
Mhm.
As if every time he has to show his documents, he's going to be outed. And that's against his private life. It's all insane. Anyway.
It is, especially given like he had a passport and a driving license. It was only his birth cert, and he's the only person I've ever heard of who is required to produce his birth cert twice as an adult for courses. Apparently,
Never happened, we can assume. Because, I mean, like, I had to show my birth cert in Belgium for maybe registering my kid's birth or something. I don't know, but I lived in Ireland up until I was nearly 30, and you used your passport for anything. I don't know. He had 2 passports. Okay, let's get to the end. We've got a minute left. A minute and a half.
A declaration of incompatibility is hereby issued. The court rules in favor of Dr. Lydia Foy.
Doctor had bollocks, that's what he was.
Doctored appearance.
Yeah.
Okay, shortly after the court ruled in favour of Dr. Lydia Foy, the Irish state appealed the decision. This escalated the case to the Supreme Court. Then 3 years. So the Irish state fought it for 3 years, and then they dropped it. And then a whole new can of worms came up to start after that. Followed to saying, Penny, the Irish state introduced the Gender Recognition Act 2015, blah, blah, blah. Happy ever after. 22 years after Lydia's fight began. Okay, well, let's talk about Lydia's fight. Oh, there he is.
That's how he looked when he was in court.
That's what he looked like back then, yeah. I mean, the actor, like, it's not the worst casting, you know?
Like, terrible. It's so manipulative because it's trying to come across that this is like, oh, they're all these young, innocent, you know, they can pass or whatever. When really, it's like, it's literally your granddad in your granny's clothes coming in here, like.
Yeah. So what we just watched was, again, probably one in a series of perhaps the entire story of Lydia Foy. The bit that we saw, though, was concentrated on the court case that sort of was only one of the steps involved in him getting his own birth cert, but also in Ireland eventually adopting a legal gender recognition law that was one of the most advanced in the world. So Lydia Foy himself wasn't involved in the fight for self-ID. He was involved in the fight for something that he wanted for himself. He didn't care about anyone else. But the people who helped him, the lawyers that helped him, cared about their own legal careers and reputations, I think. So let's try and go back to the beginning. And well, first of all, before we do that, like, what's your takeaway? If you didn't know anything about the story, what would your takeaway be of watching that short film? You're a normie, or maybe you're a Gen Z, and you're not old enough to know that transvestites once roamed the land. What would you think after watching that short film, Sean?
I'd actually be in favor of it. I'd feel really bad for him. I'd think, oh, well, that's great. Like, he's so innocent. He's so helpless. All he wants to do is, go about his business. I wouldn't be thinking about the knock-on effect this stuff has had. I wouldn't be thinking of the reality of it, of like how it's actually a big bloke. Like, because you'd feel sympathy thinking he's just this gay fella. When really, it's literally a straight man married to a woman and trying to leech off the LGB shit, for sympathy.
Mm-hmm. And would it change? This is just something I always ask people, and I never really, from TERFs, I get answers, but you never get a normal person to answer this question. There was part of Lydia Foy's struggle, let's call it, his camp, to get to convince the courts that he wasn't a sexual deviant, meaning there was no sexual aspect involved in it, when probably there was. Would it change if you were a normal person, you were watching that and you felt sorry for him and you knew that it was like he was sexually motivated or sexually aroused by the idea of himself a woman? Would that make any difference to you?
Yes.
Well, knowing what I know, yeah, but I mean, if I didn't know what I knew, I probably wouldn't understand that at all. I'd be like, oh, well, sure, what difference does it make?
That's the question I always have for people. It's very hard to get anyone to answer it, though.
It's just 'cause
And
it's where that sexual deviation, where that leads to, because we see it all the time, we see how common it is and how that leads to people, taking their dicks out in the women's changing room, things like that. But if you're just thinking, oh, this is just some fella, yeah, he's attracted to himself, you're not going to think of it in that kind of sense, if you know what I mean.
so I always wonder that, yeah, if people knew the story of Lydia Foy and say, well, no, there's this thing called autogynephilia, and I've no doubt he was very distressed by it. Like, I'm very charitable in that way. I understand that it's a very distressing thing that these men have, but that's why he, quote unquote, transitioned. So let's go a little bit backwards. Who is this person? Maybe, Catherine, you could tell us a little bit about who Lydia Foy is, how it all started.
Great, sure. A lot of this is known, but just to recap, actually, because it can be very easy to get lost in the Foy story. He was born in 1947. He will be 79 this year. He studied dentistry and graduated in 1971. He had about five boys and one sister, and there is well, he's written about his early childhood. He's always claimed to be obsessed, as I understand, by female dresses and by his sister's dress. He found his communion pretty distressful because he couldn't wear a dress. He got married in 1977 to a woman, and either shortly or before the marriage, he told his wife he liked female clothing. And when he didn't tell her this at the time, he subsequently admitted in an interview that when his wife was pregnant, they had two children, first born in 1978, the second in 1980. Donald would sneak into her wardrobe and put on her maternity dresses.
Any evidence that, again, just coming back to these two main types, this sort of, there's gay lads who, especially back then, would have maybe wanted to, quote unquote, live as women because it was easier, maybe, or was more acceptable, or it wasn't as easy to be openly gay man. And so, like, back then, the true transsexual was actually considered a very gender non-conforming boy who pursued conformed. What's the word? Persisted through until adulthood. Voila. And then there's the rest of the guys who were known to be sexually aroused cross dressers, and those guys were excluded from being considered real transsexuals. And so a lot of these men would have made up these, sort of retrofitted their childhoods to say that they were gender non-conforming boys. Is there evidence that Lydia Foy was one of those?
He I think he claims he was an effeminate child. And then from an early stage, I think he said he used to use a towel to pretend it was a skirt. There's reference to being fascinated by some blue velvet dress, I believe.
Oh yeah, that's him, yeah.
And he did say he got teased for being gay in school. He described himself as effeminate. It's hard to know. I mean, and I don't want to jump the gun, but when his wife gives evidence in 2002, it's fairly clear he was a very standard male for all intents and purposes. They had a sex life, he fathered kids. There was no evidence on the outside that he was anything but a male.
And I think that, I don't know what you think, Sean, but like, I've been looking into a lot into like the link between autism and autogynephilia. And autism is really like self-direct. It's self-directed, which means auto is the prefix, and the same with autogynephilia. these men sort of are in relationships with themselves, and they have a lot of these interests that are sort of what I'm trying to say is he has a lot of the same traits that I see in a lot of the autistic guys who are autogynephilic today, except that he was born in 1947, and so his interest there were no video games. So he has these really he's like hobbies and interests, and he's very sort of he'll never talk about other people. He talks about himself. He talks about his own hobbies. He's very like what back then he would have been diagnosed as some form of autistic, which is just really sort of a common thread in autogynephilic males if you know much about this subject. So he's really obsessed with like plants and botany and like creating different breeds or species of plants and stuff. And he ended up growing like the world's tallest foxglove. And he was into all kinds of instruments and stuff. So he was very like he was a train nerd type, of ye olden times, which really perfectly matches the Dungeons and Dragons guys of today. And when you see interviews with him in his house, he's a hoarder. He's got like absolute mess. Like he's a spurgy, nerdy lad, but born in the wrong decade for video games and cat ears. You know what I mean? Like if he had been born 15 years ago, he'd be currently wearing Sailor Moon outfits and cat headphones and sitting in a pink gamer chair. That's what I think anyway. What do you think, Sean, with your gaydar?
100% agree with you there. It's very common, regardless of sexuality, before, autogynephiles or even if they're gender dysphoric to have some sort of autism or ADHD or OCD. It's very common. Like, I have no idea why. Like, I'm not a doctor, but it's something that I've noticed, especially when I was in Belong To and things. A lot of the people that would, start to transition would be on some spectrum.
Yeah, very self-directed sort of behaviors, difficulty understanding other people, difficulty empathizing with other people, difficulty caring about other people, and sort of stuck within rigid, systematized sort of thinking like girl equals skirt and long hair and stuff. So, right, where are we up to? We're up to 1977. The girls were born in 1980 and 1982. Is that what you said? They're basically my age now. They're out there somewhere. I've tried to get in touch with them and I can't.
1978, 1980. So yeah.
Right, 1978, 1980, they were born. And then what happened? Didn't he go off then to Saudi Arabia or something?
He did. He spent some time abroad, and at some point, for a time, the wife and kids went over to spend some time with him, and then they all came back. And it was in about 1982, 1983, I believe, that he told his wife he's a transvestite. He enjoyed wearing female clothing, to which she responded, this is from the judgment, she would have nothing to do with such activity. Neither she nor the children will ever see him so dressed. And then he was never to mention it to her again. As against that, then in the late 1980s, it seems that's when a bit of a breakdown at work happened. It doesn't really give much information, but it says he collapsed at work one day.
Didn't he say he has scoliosis?
Yes, there was something about that, but I'm curious why he collapsed. Like middle-aged, healthy men don't tend to just keel over. But no, he did collapse, and eventually he was working for the Eastern Health Board at the time. He was informed his contract would be terminated in late 1990. I think he did threaten legal action, some sort of settlement. But as far as I can understand, as far as I know,
Was it related to his predilection, like anything to do with his contract being ended or nothing to do with that?
we don't know. But from I've heard the grapevine, it was nothing to do with that. No, it was obviously. I think if he was, I suppose, as a dentist, if you're clearly capable of performing your job, that was probably it. And he was eventually told he was given a reference, but it pretty much just stated the very bare dates and times of employment, and that was it. He was then refused unemployment benefit in 1991, as I understand. And the interesting thing is, like, it's interesting to hear him referred to as Dr. Foy in the video because he never worked as a dentist after 1990, as far as I understand. And it's odd because dental is quite a well-paid profession. He had flack willing to take up his case. Why wouldn't you fight for your livelihood? Mhm.
It is very mysterious. Again, coming back to the typical profile of the heterosexual autogynephile, I've noticed that the desire to transition gets stronger the more they cross dress. And then, you know, at some point they pass a point of no return and it's when, not if. And often the decision when it comes to transition to start taking hormones and start calling yourself a woman is often precipitated by a big traumatic awful, shocking event. So the things that I see most often, you would think it would be death of a parent, and that's common. And also somebody pointed out to me recently, the death of the parent thing might not just be the shock and the trauma, but it might also be an inheritance thing. So maybe like worried about being cut out of a will or something. So that might be the reason also why that tends to happen at those moments. But often it's a medical thing. So I've seen so many stories. I'm in a lot of these groups and I see so many stories where they got into car accidents, fell off a motorbike, fell off a ladder, broke their leg. One of them was colitis. Was it Claire Farrell that one of the Irish ones got a bad oh no, it was the Women's Institute guy, you know, the guy sneaking around behind a tree. I don't maybe you're not online enough to know about that guy, but the Women's is or Woman's Own or one of these women's magazines like about a decade ago put this guy on the cover and he's like hiding, he's peeking from behind a tree and he just looks so creepy. His was a colitis, and so Lydia Foy's was like he has. I'm pretty sure he has scoliosis. And again, that just sort of adds this sort of like little bit wimpy, weak-ish, scrawny, nerdy, sensitive guy who's into music, fairly spurgy. He did have problems with his posture and stuff, so I wouldn't be surprised if he did keel over and have some sort of a thing where he woke up in hospital and said it's now or never. This is what I've seen over and over again. They get in hospital and they say they had a brush with death and they say it's either now or never. So that's
There's another well-known Irish person. His wife died when she was quite young. They had two small daughters. She had breast cancer, but apparently his wife told him on her deathbed that her dearest wish was for her husband to live his true life and become a woman. I know.
a likely story. Which one was that?
I said, Liam, Linda, there's an interview about it. Linda Sheridan.
Oh, him. Oh, he's weirdo. He's everywhere. He's at every march and an event and everything. God, he's so odd. Yeah. Then there's also the other. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say I could just imagine him waking up after getting his spine straightened up and then being like, "Oh, gives a pair of knickers." Like he's just mental.
Or, you know, it could also be that like when he collapsed and then they got into hospital and they cut his trousers open, they found the knickers on him and he said, right, I've been outed. You know, there's these things also have been known to happen. And then it's sort of just, yeah, who knows? But they're just so predictable, these stories.
Yeah, it's like Monica Helms, your man who designed the trans flag. He was, I think, in his autobiography or something, he was writing that for years, like from the age of 12, he was robbing his mother's knickers and wearing them, and eventually got caught by his wife, like years and years later, and that's when he was like, right,
Yeah.
I'm a woman.
And Lydia Foy brings up often the communion dress story. And that to me, that's supposed to be the retrofitting I was always a non-conforming boy story. But what I've noticed with these other gynephiles is the reason why I call it fetishistic as opposed to just paraphilic is because fetish it refers to like obsession with particular objects or fabrics or particular type of things, and he seemed really obsessed with those like that the communion dresses really are something that he was seemed to be obsessed with. And I find that a lot of these men will get fixated on one particular type of material, type of dress, type of pose, something like that. And I think with Lady Ford, that's just more evidence for me that he's not a gynophilic type. But there's another reason why these men tend to tune out, and it is often basically what happened to in Lydia Foy's life at around the time that he did tune out, which was his daughters were born and his wife was pregnant. So you were saying that he used to sneak in to the wardrobe and get his wife's maternity dresses. Do either of you think that if the Irish public knew these kind of details, they would care? You know, like, is it just me who's like, you know, like that's kind of gross. Like whatever you're into, but you know, it's just I suppose whatever you're into, but I won't be I will lose a lot of sympathy for him. I don't know. It's just me or
I think as a single case study, probably not, but if they were to see just how common it is, especially within autogynephilia and how many trans women are actually autogynephiles, I think then they'd care. If there was like
even if
more
they knew
structured studies done.
But even if they knew, and so basically why we're here and why we're doing this also is because there are no studies. And so we're just sort of like trying to show sort of what's going on. And then I'm very aware that I sound really mean. I'm like, look at this weird old man and his weird perversion. And I sound like a prude or whatever. But I'm just like, I just want the information out there.
I think you're very sympathetic, Roisin. Even the fact about the autism Asperger's, I've never considered that context before. But it's very good points. And while he's retconned his childhood, I've no doubt some of what he says is true. I can imagine he was maybe a bit of a nerdy kid. He probably was picked on and bullied. Bit funny. Mm-hmm.
And is that was just got your basic, incel type, or manosphere type. Like they all have the same kind of upbringing in that sense, where they're all a bit nerdy. The girls didn't like them, they like their trains, whatever, and they just kind of diverted into two ways. Like this is the same enemy that young liberal socialist feminists can't stand. Like they hate men, white straight men, and it's like, oh, but once he puts on a dress, he's like suddenly that enemy is gone.
It really is the same profile of people. And that's the thing, like, there's a difference between saying, I hate this man, I want him to die, and saying, right, I feel bad for him, he has this distressful condition, but he's not a woman. That's it. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, I don't have any ill will. I mean, Lydia Foy, it's hard not to have ill will against him because he is particularly narcissistic, but that's a really common thread. I mean, but that's when you look up research papers on men with autism in general and women with autism in general, they do have this reputation of being quite selfish and egotistical, which is not really the same selfishness and egotisticalism as you see in other people because they have a very difficult time coping with other people.
Yeah, it's not like narcissism or anything where you don't care what other people feel. I think it's more of a they struggle to understand how
Yeah.
people feel properly.
Exactly. But Lydia Foy has no concern for any other human being. Like that's so clear in every interview, every transcript, everything I've ever read about him. He has no concept of anyone outside himself. And it's just super Fergie. Like he's extremely self-focused. And to the extent that he has created a sexual and loving romantic relationship with himself, which is what AGPs do. Like,
I
that's
do
kind
think
of
he's well, and part of what really irks me about this, I've no wish to intrude on his family's privacy. He's very much presented as the family are completely swept into the background. People vaguely know that he was married, had kids, doesn't see them because it's the wife's fault, of course. She's horrible. But there's never any focus on what the impact of this did to his family. And it's possible to do that. It's possible to say, to talk about his family positively and say he is still a father. But it's like they never existed. This poor miserable person from day one is now an adult son. I think if people had some concept of the backstory with the wife or children, I think that would certainly go a long way too. Mhm.
Yeah, and what's also fascinating about the Lydia Foy story is that it's the same story told over and over again. I mean, all trans stories are the same stories told all over and over again because you have to plaster over the details because they're too gory, no matter which type of trans person you're talking about. This particular type is very gory. So what you get fed over and over again every year, twice a year, you get the Lydia Foy story regurgitated on a different Irish platform. And it's always the same thing. Look what's on the screen there. Campaigning for rights and protection of transgender people. It's so boring because it's the same thing over and over again. And I wonder, do Irish people say to themselves, I wonder what the deal is with his wife and what happened. So we're up to the point now where his daughters have been born. 1980, his second daughter's been born. They haven't gone to Saudi Arabia yet. He has already told his wife, I'm into wearing frilly knickers on the occasion. She apparently, according to court case later on, felt that it was a reflection of her own femininity, was the way she was able to deal with it, apparently. So how do we know all this, Catherine? How do we have all of this information? What did he do to end up in court?
He was eventually, after he collapsed, they were called in to see a psychiatrist together. And one thing I'll say, Roisin, this is all in the court cases. Like, this is what's interesting. All this information is out there for anyone who's got the interest to read it. And once I think it was talked about and it was clear he wanted to go ahead with it, at that point, the marriage irrevocably fell apart.
And what year was that?
1991.
Right.
There was an agreement made, a judicial separation was sought. There was an agreement made. He would see the kids every week. I think he'd have them months and months. But as part of it, it was said that the children weren't to be told about the gender issues and he was to appear to the kids dressed as a man. As I understand them, that got breached fairly quickly. Anne Foy, his wife, ended up calling the police, and at some point then a borrowing order was sought and granted to her. And a borrowing order, just put in context, a borrowing order is when the courts order somebody to leave a home. It was usually sought against husbands in the 1990s, and it's only ever given it's felt as a real threat of violence. And so bear in mind, back in the 90s, coercive control wasn't even a factor then. So for a wife to get a borrowing order, I don't know how many were issued, but there were few and far between, is quite serious. Then eventually, after much discussion, and fairness, psychiatrists did interview the children, And eventually, the Circuit Court, I think in 1994, ordered that the house be put in his wife's name and all contact be severed with the children.
And so they own the house together. This is the house in Mullingar or Athy? Where
Mullingar, I believe.
So during the town of Mullingar, Westmeath, they both owned the house, but then the court ordered that the house be given to her and she be given full custody of the children. Do we know anything about what judge that was?
I don't. It's family law cases, very little known about it. And
Okay.
bear in mind, at the time, during the first initial separation, no order was made for maintenance, and I believe that was because Foy wasn't working at the time. And before the incident with the borrowing order, at one point he did turn up on the younger daughter's birthday, dressed in a pink skirt with information on gender reassignment material.
Gave it to her for her birthday. Gave it to her on her birthday, didn't he? And actually, for some reason, I know what material it was. Do you have that? Was it in the court case? It was like something that came from the UK. Was it from Shaft or like Stephen Whittle? They had like before they had Press for Change, they had some other group in the UK, and I'm pretty sure I remember reading what guide it was. Yeah, it was a guide that was made for young people explaining what transsexualism was essentially, and he gave it to the daughter despite having been told keep this away from your daughters. Now, being very charitable, it's very possible that the judge who issued the barring order, we can leave up the possibility that he or she just really didn't like
Cross-dressing.
transvestites. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, that's what I'd be thinking. Like, if I know it's very common for AGPs, especially the ones that were married to women, to be abusive, 100%. But I mean, if you're going in front of a judge, being like, "Oh, I divorced him, I don't want to do with him. He's wearing my clothes." Like, I feel like in Ireland, especially, they'd be like, "Yeah, right. He can't see the kids again." Like, that's just freaky.
It's
So I
possible.
would kind of think that's very possible.
Yeah,
We
the-
don't know.
and just to think, I've got the court in front of me. In October 93, borrowing order was obtained against Dr. Foy in circumstances she now disputes. 20th of May, Circuit Court, in addition to confirming the borrowing order, also made an order prohibiting any access to the children by Dr. Foy, and in addition directed said doctor that the house be transferred into Mrs. Foy's name. An appeal was taken but dismissed by order of the High Court. To this day, the applicant feels aggrieved at these orders. So the wife sought the borrowing order once, it was appealed and was never overturned.
And do you know anything about when the fact that it was never overturned? Does that mean nobody ever asked for it to be overturned, or when it automatically?
No, he did. He did appeal against it, but the Circuit Order upheld the borrowing order, and the High Court also did too.
And was this after he was recognised as a woman?
This was in 1994, and he had the irreversible surgery in 1992. The state apparently paid £3,000 towards the surgery. I think he always forgets to mention that when he's giving his list of grievances.
Mad. So gays couldn't even get married, and this fella's getting state funding to chop his bollocks off.
Yes.
Yeah. So a very important part of the story, and I feel the most important part of the story is how, I suppose, if we wanted to zoom out, put it into context, how his personal story and the personal story of his family sort of intersected with Ireland's desire to enter the 21st century as a modern place with modern laws, and how lawyers sort of saw his case and took it upon themselves to bring Ireland into the modern world by fighting to get him recognized as a transsexual. But that's not quite what Lydia Foy wanted. What Lydia Foy wanted was he wanted revenge. He was aggrieved, as the judge said. And when he went to get free legal help, he went with a list of grievances, and getting recognized as a transsexual, which we were still known as back then, was very low on his list of priorities. Catherine, can you talk us through the timeline of what happened when he went to the free legal advice clinic, if you know it?
Okay, he started in 1993. I understand he started writing to the registrar to get his birth cert changed, which realistically was never going to happen. It was in July 1996 that Flack got involved. And well, the court case was heard in 2002. He did at some point go to the European Court. And let me bring up the details here. It was the European Commission of Human Rights First Chamber in 1997. And again, it was pretty much a list of all his grievances. I could go into some more detail. And he lost on them all. It wasn't a judgment on the substantive issue, but in some instances they found he hadn't exhausted the domestic procedures or the domestic law, and also there was a bit of a time limit. So so he didn't succeed in the European Court of Human Rights the first time.
But he was represented by Flack. They held him as them.
They did represent him, but there's a very interesting excerpt from this judgment in the European Court where it said, dated 1st of February 96, the applicant's solicitors informed the applicant that the application for legal aid in order to obtain counsel's opinion on the prospects of reopening the proceedings in order to renew access and to have the applicant's equity in the house restored had been refused on the basis that it would not be in conformity with the purpose and terms of the legal aid scheme to grant it, that the applicant had a matter of law and a reasonable grounds for taking, defending, or being a party to proceedings, that the applicant had not made a case for being granted a certificate which is such as to warrant the conclusion that she was reasonably likely to succeed, and that having regard to all the circumstances of the case would not be reasonable to grant legal aid. Sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful. I'm repeating it in full. So basically, Flack refused point blank to get involved with the family access or the home.
Because he had no chance. So
He had no
Flack
chance.
is free legal advice clinic or centre or whatever in Ireland, which was where you went if you were broke and you wanted to take a case. Flack had another operation which was, maybe I'm going to get these terms wrong, but public interest law.
Mm.
So essentially, in later interviews, Lydia Foy says, oh, Flack turned me down, and he wasn't very happy about them because he went to them saying, help me with this stuff, and they were like, no, you're flutered, like you've no chance. But then they said, stop me if I'm wrong here, Catherine, but then they said, but hold on, maybe we can do something else for you. There's a chance that maybe we can bring a judicial review of the law that stops you from getting your birth certificate changed. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And just for context, we're in the mid-90s here. In Europe, every country of Europe, so the way, for people who aren't from Europe, this is sort of how it works. European countries tend to copy each other. You've got the norm entrepreneurs or the legal entrepreneurs in places like the UK and Germany, but especially in this field, in this context, especially in the Nordic countries. And then we'd all sort of eventually copy each other more or less. Every country in Europe, in the EU, which existed already then, but minus all the countries in the East, every country in Europe except Ireland and the UK had some form of legal gender recognition, which meant that regardless of what hoops you had to jump through in Denmark or Germany or whatever, there was a way to get your gender change, get your legal sex markers changed, and to be accepted for all purposes as the opposite sex that you say that you are. And in the UK and in Ireland, we didn't have any sort of legal way of doing that. It was not possible. The other country in Europe that still didn't have it until late was Malta. And so that's people sort of say, like, Ireland and Malta are among the countries with the most advanced legal gender recognition or the most liberal legal gender recognition systems in the world. And it's because we had nothing for so long. And so we had nothing at all. And we'll come to how the European Court ruled later. But as a result, the system was a nod and wink sort of system. Can you explain what that means, Catherine, in terms of getting your documents?
I'm not too sure, Roshan, to be honest. I actually wasn't aware of this part of the history. I know that the UK did bring in the Gender Recognition Act in 2004. It was quite hotly debated, and it's interesting now to look back. So one politician, Norman Tebbit, at the time I would have been quite conservative, made some very good points, all of which have come to pass about the risks of this legislation. But it's also very amusing in the UK. And when they brought in the legislation, they did bring in a rule too that said in the laws of primogeniture, you couldn't actually use gender ID to become the eldest son, as it were. So even back in the early heady days of innocence with the UK, I think they did realise there was a chance that this could be abused. And of course, women were the ones who got stopped benefiting it from anyway. But I'm usually speed with the other European countries, I'll be honest.
Well, the other European countries all had some sort of get the chop and we'll do what you want. Ireland and the UK sort of, you could just go into the passport office and you would just get your documents. They would just jimmy away, like there was just ways around it. There were no official channels, but the men who wanted this and the women, I don't know if there were any women who wanted this in Ireland, but there were ways of getting the documents that you wanted, and none of them were formal, and it was all the nod and wink system. So what's interesting about this is the demand for self-ID and the demand for legal gender recognition are two very different things. So legal gender recognition is some sort of recognize me, whatever the hoops I have to jump through. And then self-ID is no conditions. And what's funny about the timeline is that in 2004, when the UK introduced their Gender Recognition Act, it was just before self-ID started to be an activist demand. So they sort of really just dodged a bullet. And because we took a little bit longer, by the time we got around to actually being forced to introduce some kind of legal gender recognition, the demand for self-ID had taken off, and Argentina had already done it. And Argentina had already done it because they got loads of quote unquote transsexuals, travestis. And also they ran some really good campaigns. They had a lot of good campaigners and stuff. They also have a big HIV problem. It's very different context. But self-ID became a thing and had been introduced in 2012. And the Irish campaigners were like, we're not going to go do the stodgy old UK version that they just introduced. We're going to go for this brand new, shiny, innovative version of legal gender recognition. But up until why I was asking is because we know that Lydia Foy did have documents and facts. He did have passports. He had 2 passports with female on them. He had a driver's license with female on it. And it was all done with this nod and wink system. He had library cards with female on it. He had everything. He had all of his documents that he needed with female on them. And so this idea that what we just saw in the film, that he was going to suffer, he suffered so much waiting, like this bus that would never come to have this birth cert. It wasn't really about the birth certs because he didn't really need it. It was the principle of the thing.
Exactly. Like I said, I think the last time I had to show my birth cert was maybe when I got married, or maybe when for the kids when he moved back to Ireland. I've always been interested by the fact that he was asked to show his birth cert when applying for 2 different courses. Like it's almost like he was seeking out courses that would ask for it.
So he goes to FLAC, he says, I want this. And they were like, no, we're not, get away. And they let him down, as he said himself. But then they said, you know what, we could be entrepreneurs here and we could get a judicial review and we could get his legal gender recognition. So Bill Shipsey was the guy who sort of took him on and said, we're going to get you, we're going to fight this thing. And he was like, oh, yeah, whatever. So I have a recording of him talking about that. Is there anything else you want to say about that before I move on?
Just interesting, Catherine. One of my relations, when divorce came in 95, 96, she'd been separated for 16, 17 years by then. So she did file for divorce. And her ex-husband, because he wasn't working, was entitled to free legal aid. She wasn't because she had a job, albeit, it wasn't a hugely well-paid job, and she brought up the kids from the age of birth. So in terms of FLAC being principled, like I said, they're always there to offer support to men who, if they had Indigenous means.
And interesting to note also that Michael Farrell, who was the lad who was representing Lydia Foy in the short film that we watched, he's now working in a nice cushy job in the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, where the European Court of Human Rights is based. So come full circle there. All right, I'm just going to play a little for the season that's in it, International Women's Day of 2021, I think it was.
I think it was 2023.
Was it 2023, was it?
This is the Bill Shipsey interviewed the bravest woman he'd ever met. I think it was. Sorry.
Yes, we're going to just have a look at this other amazing video where so this is Bill Shipsey on the right. Do you see it?
I do.
So Bill Shipsey was the guy from FLAC who was like, he's so full of shit, like, and he's still, after all these years, still fucking full of shit. And this was International Women's Day, and they invited on the bravest woman they'd ever met, a man in a dress, Lydia Foy. But they tried to get him to sort of follow the script about how amazing he is and they are and all this stuff. Just so, there he is now.
Okay, hi everyone. We're going to begin. My name is Joe McGrath, and I'm the VP for EDI in the College of Social Sciences and Law.
EDI.
In addition to be hosting this International Women's Day event today, the theme this year is Embrace Equity. To celebrate this, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Lydia Foy, the UCD alumna who led the legal challenges to the law on gender recognition in Ireland. Lydia's long fight for gender recognition not only allowed her to finally live her first hope, it paved the way for further historic social change in Ireland and eventually led to the passing of the Gender Recognition Act 2015. This legislation enabled trans people to have their gender recognised in law. Lydia's fight took place during a time of significant social change in Ireland, as Ireland developed into a more progressive and inclusive society.
This is the narrative.
Lydia was an important part of that. For International Women's Day and its theme of embracing equity, we explore her remarkable legal journey. To do so, we're joined by her senior counsel in her case, Mr. Bill Shipsey, who will lead this conversation. Bill is a UCD alumni awardee, a human rights activist, and a retired senior counsel. Bill, over to you.
Thank you. Hello.
Thank you very much, Joe, and hello, Lydia. It's
Good morning.
Good
morning. Great to see
even virtually on International Women's Day.
So insulting.
Start and to ask you questions. What I thought it might be useful for those listening in would be to give a very brief background on the history of the litigation without going into any detail, so that people can get some sense of the long road that you had before there was recognition for you, for your gender, and also before the enactment of the Act in 2015. And it is in fact 30 years, if my recollection is correct. It was 1993 that you first applied to the Registrar of Births, Marriages and Deaths to have your birth cert rectified so that your gender as a woman could be recognized in that. And then 4 years later, I think you'd had a somewhat fruitless correspondence with the registrar who was denying you the opportunity to have your birth cert rectified. You approached FLAC, and in fact, I think it was Mary Johnson, who was the solicitor in FLAC at the time, who recognized that she thought that you had a good case, and through her.
Just to jump in here, it was that woman who said, you know what, we could take on this case for a judicial review. Yeah, it was definitely her idea. And then Bill Shipsey took it on. And by the way, Bill Shipsey got sued. Maybe I'm going to get it wrong, but he had a project called a company called Art for Amnesty, and where he was like doing some art stuff. Don't ask me the details, but he was using the Amnesty International name and they sued him to stop using it or something. So he was involved in some dodgy spoofing. He's a bit of a spoofer, I think, this lad. And you can see he's very full of himself here and his role in like bringing Ireland into the 21st century.
Oh, yeah.
Eileen Barrington was contacted, and Eileen in turn contacted me, and we commenced proceedings on your behalf in 1997, judicial review proceedings in which we sought to challenge the decision of the registrar to refuse you your rights. You'll remember then that in 2000, we had a long hearing in the High Court before Mr. Justice McKechnie. It ran for 14 days. We had expert witnesses from Holland and England and psychiatric evidence to explain what transgenderism was and to explain to the court the legal and medical issues that were involved for you. We were initially unsuccessful, and then in 2005, the European Convention on Human Rights was incorporated into Irish law. We went back to the court, and eventually in 2014, ultimately, but first I think it was in 2009, Mr. Justice McKechnie held in your favor, and your case and the decision in your case was the first time that there was a declaration of incompatibility with the European Convention on Human Rights, declaration of incompatibility that Irish law didn't comply with the obligations under that. So that was, I think, almost 17 years till the proceedings settled eventually. And then in 2015, the Gender Recognition Bill became the Gender Recognition Act, and you got the first certificate, the first birth certificate under that act, recognizing you as a woman in that birth certificate. But I think what I'd like to do is perhaps ask you what first motivated you? What was it, as it were, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, that persuaded you that you needed to do something when you were refused a recognition for the gender that you were then living in back in 1993? What moved you to actually do something and to want to litigate?
Well, first of all, I thought I was the worst person you could take in order to take that challenge up, because I was sort of older than I thought I should have been, without, collapsing in a heap, which of course I did in the end. But I also thought of somebody that had no family complications of any kind, and maybe much younger, would have been in a much better position. And I would have sort of anything for a quiet life. The birth cert wouldn't have been number one on my list had I been treated what I thought would be fairly in society. And I felt that the birth cert was used as an excuse to deprive me of basic rights and to trivialize my existence or
It's
my
pure
need
grievance.
for it, which was, I thought, a little bit of a ridiculous approach when they
Sorry, but just look at his face. Like Bill Shipsey has built a career around saying this poor woman needed this birth cert to be able to live, to be able to get up in the morning. And he's just sits like, oh no, actually, I didn't give a shit. And he's just like, shut up, Lydia.
And then boy versus family, is it family history, family baggage? Like, what a nice way to talk about your kids.
And it's he never mentions them. They don't exist. It's that oh yeah.
But like, what rights was he talking about? He's saying that they were holding the birth cert against them to, like, stop him from having equal rights. But I mean, they were paying for you to get your balls chopped off. Like, what rights didn't you have?
Well, the rights that he was referring to was the right to private life, which so that like in a legal sense, that's the right that they are all pretending to believe he had, which was the right to keep it a secret that you're a man, because the Court of Human Rights decided that everyone has that right, and that right applies to cross-dressers who want to force everyone to pretend they're women. Sorry, my dog is trying to eat my eating. But just look what he says.
Take each court to get rid of my name, my race, whatever the fuck is on my birth cert. I haven't a clue. Could I take them to court to remove all that so it can be private and then just a blank Tipex out birth cert?
It seems like, I mean, I'm done with the term human rights. Like, I just think you can make it, if you've got much money and time, you can make it mean whatever the fuck you want it to mean. But I love this video because you can see Bill Shipsey going, oh no, Lydia, please don't go off script. We talked about this. Like, tell the people how it was an epic journey of justice and blah, blah, blah. And he's just there going, I didn't even care about certain births.
I know we should actually put out that still for meme competition.
Yeah. Sweaty bum time. And then there's an even better video. I think because this is going to go on too long. There's an even better video where he gets even nastier because none of the lawyers who are involved are actually on the call or on their webinar. But anyway, let's just go for another couple of minutes and see what he says and watch Bill Shipsey's face.
He said that anyone can ridicule you. They can ask for your old name. They can ask for whatever, and they can deny you basically anything. And of course, the birth cert is irrelevant. Well, if the birth cert is irrelevant, how can you justify treating somebody like that? And if the birth cert is the only way of getting redress, then I have to go for it because, in fact,
redress,
the birth cert initially hadn't been my priority. I felt I was just treated so badly in society and represented so badly in church and law and in family matters, etc., that I had applied to FLAG and to redress actually other matters that I felt, that were treating me less than a citizen with full rights. So they thought at that stage that they didn't have the capacity because I'd already tried to exhaust any way of appeal. And initially, I was turned down for my list completely. But at the bottom of my list was the birth cert, actually. And
I love that.
when I got back to FLAC again, I was advised that it was free legal advice and that if I lost a case, I would have to pay for it. And that any assets or anything I had, well, I had nothing at the time anyway. But, quite a sort of anonymous sort of soundings initially. But then when it finally came back that they would think of, in the interest of review of the births, marriages, deaths register and that they would possibly find this of interest. And it was Mr. Bill Shipsey himself who actually initiated everything for applying in an open court to seek judicial review. And very few people understand that I was not looking for any mad publicity. I was looking for basic rights. But when
Basic rights.
so actually got to the media before it got to me, because somebody came to my door and said it's all out, and I said, "What's all out?" It was like
He talks an awful lot of shite. Like I can't keep up with what he's on about.
selfish bitch to say that I was
Selfish bitch.
Selfish bitch. He has this thing where I've seen him say it loads of times where he pretends other people call him a bitch because I suppose it feels validating for him to be called a bitch. But yeah, so what he's saying here, he's waffling on, but essentially, to paraphrase, he's saying, I didn't care about any of that stuff. It was the only way that I could get back at people was to do this thing. People say she's a selfish bitch. She's bringing shame on the family by bringing all this publicity. But he's saying, I didn't actually want any of the publicity. It was just once, it's a scandalous story. Transvestite brings judicial review to get his birth cert. And once that hit the headlines, that was it for 20 years. He was in and out of the headlines, you know?
And I think as well, when they said about Flacco taking the assets he owned, there's no way to prove it, but I think one of the reasons he never practiced as a dentist afterwards was partly out of spite. If he was earning, his wife could have sought maintenance. And then when Flack got involved, he was earning, do you know what I mean? So he had nothing actually to lose with this. He's been living on social welfare since the early 90s, as I understand. I did talk to him, as a family, and that's her take on it. She thinks there's no big secret as to his dental registration, but this just became his life. And it was more in his interest just not to work and devote his entire life to this.
Jesus, that is a grit.
Yeah.
I would like to know, because he's referred to Dr. Foy so often. Like, I don't know what point, if you don't practice or you retire, that your dental license expires.
You're off.
Well, I wouldn't let him anywhere near me, Gums. I wouldn't even let him look at me teeth. Like, be shitting it.
His own aren't great either,
But it is funny, isn't it? Keep calling him doctor, doctor, doctor. Like, he's just trying to make something out of. He's just trying to be like, right, we know everyone thinks the first connotation is that you're a sleaze bag, but we're just going to do everything we can to make it look like we didn't like they all know what he's like. They dealt with him for years. Michael Farrell, they all dealt with him for years. He's seriously aggrieved narcissist, sleazy
Well,
crop.
hang on. Do you remember earlier you were saying that asking did he have a disability or something? If he's on the dole that long, he's faking disability. That's what loads of people do when they're gonna we'll cut you off.
one of his arguments in the first court case was that he had he had a congenital disability, because that's what being a woman is all about.
Yeah. Yeah, well, what's interesting was that when they had that first case where they lost, and you can read the whole thing online, as you were saying, Catherine, they had Louis Gorin come from the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, whatever it's called, and he was the chair of transsexualism, the only one in the world, the first in the world, the place that became the Dutch clinic that ended up creating the Dutch protocol that was largely Louis Gorin's work. Louis Gorin was developing the concept of sort of an intersex brain, not exactly intersex brain, but a brain that went down the wrong developmental pathway and created a female brain inside a male body, essentially, or parts of a female brain inside a male brain inside a male body. And so the reason why and it's funny because I often wonder, like, who paid for Louis Gorin to come over? And also, I think Russell Reid, or not if Russell Reid was like the surgeon in the UK, but there was some psychiatrist flew over from the UK and all. Like, who was paying for all this to get these people over to Dublin to spend 2 weeks or to spend even a couple of days testifying and saying, oh, no, these aren't like transvestite cross-dressers. This is nothing sexual at all. This is actually a real thing where something goes wrong with the brain, blah, blah, blah. And Lydia Foy was saying at that point, it's true. He was saying, I have a congenital developmental disorder of the brain. And I wonder if he got his disability sign off on that basis and nothing to do with his scoliosis or whatever, But what's interesting is trans activists after that, with the depathologization campaign, they were like, no, we're moving away from this idea that there's something, anything to do with the brain, or that it's any kind of a medical issue or whatever. But Lydia Foy still hangs on to that story. He still hangs on to the medical model and even the congenital abnormality of the brain model of transsexualism, which is completely gone out of fashion, and nobody believes that anymore. And what was interesting about that court case, the original one was, I think the judge went into it, McKechnie into it thinking, oh, these are all cross-dressing freaks, and came out of it thinking, oh no, there are real true trans people, which I don't believe at all. But yeah, shall we watch a little bit more?
Sure.
Actually doing this to embarrass not alone my family, but society in general. And it's actually, I'm sort of correcting that now, in that there was no look for publicity, and the initial media interest came even before I had knowledge of it. But it was as a result of looking for the judicial review, which was actually the only area left open to me, because I had exhausted I had written to everybody in the world, including John Major.
John Major. I wonder what he's asked John Major for.
There weren't a lot of choices about it. I actually tried to conform. There was nothing sort of brave or anything about me for a long time. I tried to conform in my very best, but I ended up with a severe eating disorder and had a very bad leg operation. And like I was saying, 1982, I was very unwell for some time.
That's when his egg cracked,
I would say that
as they say on Reddit.
I was in very bad shape and had to do something about it, basically. And when I originally approached the psychiatric profession, etc., they had very little knowledge, and they were referring to old books on the subject. And of course, it's still in a lot of dictionaries and everything else said, oh, it's C under sexual deviancy. That was the sort of approach. And yes, it had been.
You see those shapes, CD like, shut up.
Sort of register in Europe, genuine condition, etc., but not in references generally available to people who are.
Shut the fuck up. But over that 30-year period, it was obviously a period of great social change.
Yeah. Let's bring it back to the Ireland narrative.
I don't know if you recall during the legal argument in the first sort of High Court hearing, where there was reference to David Norris' case and attitudes that were mentioned in that. And there was a recognition by the trial judge, by Mr. Justice McKechnie, that Ireland had changed and that was changing. And I suppose also that you were part of that change, because certainly, although Mr. Justice McKechnie felt he couldn't hold with us in the first case, he was enormously sympathetic towards your case and had urged in the course of his judgment for the government to legislate and to act, which didn't happen until 2015. Can you just tell the people who are listening in today just something about that, you know, how you felt when the 2015 bill became the 2015 Gender Recognition Act? Because
this is funny as well, because he's like, if he didn't care in the beginning, he really fucking didn't care by the end.
Back in Ireland, as a result of your efforts and campaigning, and as a result of the case, we got quite a progressive and liberal Gender Recognition Act in Ireland compared to other countries. What was your feeling, or what was your sense when that became law?
I remember there was a scramble to try and get as many rights within that as we could, because we had the first declaration of incompatibility. We had trying to break away from just being referred to English psychiatrists, etc. And there were very severe principles sort of involved in gender recognition within a lot of places, which included Benjamin principles. You had to meant to be.
So he's talking here about, if for anyone who doesn't follow, he's saying trying to get away from the medical model. And what was being asked for in the Irish law was, we're trying to pack it full of as many rights as possible. So they were trying to make self-ID, whereas the old model was the Harry Benjamin model, where you had to live in role for 2 years and you had to And the live in role was, are you going to be able to deal with being harassed and being people not accepting you as a woman? Like, that's sort of what it was. And the self-ID basically gets rid of all that. So it's not, you have no training for walking around like a massive gorilla hon, not being accepted. You just have to, everyone else just has to adapt to you. So that's what he's talking about here.
Gladly carrying out without any other pressures, working as yourself, etc., being, what should they call it, in mode or whatever. You're expected to be actually like a very femme, which is not necessarily, every woman is not terribly femme. You can be butcher, but whatever, you can still be female. but you had to present as being feminine in a hostile society and probably go through horrendous electrolysis and hormone treatment and psychological changes and all of that. So by the time it came to the actual announcement of that major progress, I was just absolutely on tenterhooks because I didn't know if we were going to have to take as much as we could without pushing the final bit for marriage equality and the whole lot encompassed together. And I was beginning to, I was exhausted, absolutely exhausted. And Michael Farrell, who was the main person there with me at the time, he had been really wonderful and he held his cool when it came to the human rights commissioners, and they were sympathetic, keeping the sort of hold on to it. But I was totally exhausted. But just before the birth cert was issued, I had actually sort of nearly taken a break, and he said, we must get you the first. He was he was very anxious to get the actual piece of paper and for me to have number one on it, which kindly the registrar and people like that finally understood how important it was. And of course, they did put me on the number one number and everything, but there was a scramble for the birth cert at that stage and great excitement, and all of the other parties, interested parties who have been, their rights had been delayed too. They were even, they were rushing case. Remember the person looking for employment and they had to wait for the outcome of my case. And all of these directors were going on pending the outcome of my case, but pressures were there early on.
But do you have any sort of, I sense sort of from you, and even then the sort of the sense of modesty that you don't even realize how significant what you achieved was. I mean, do you have any greater sense of that 8 years after the legislation was enacted, of just what a significant breakthrough you achieved through your case and through your courage and through fighting for what you believed was fair and right?
Well, I think it was wonderful. I was very insecure in a lot of the time because initially I was so badly represented in the press, etc. I felt I didn't have the right to reply to any, to general society in general. And once FLAC and all the people involved in FLAC, I probably can't remember or shouldn't try and list them all off now, but
Johnson was there,
right, yeah.
Dwyer was there.
Oh, and all of them, yeah.
All for the glory of the lawyers.
What was I going?
And did you hear that Michael Farrell really, really wants them to have the number one birth cert? He was just like,
Yeah, I saw that. In fairness, Lydia, Donald himself doesn't seem to have pushed about it, but no, it was Farrell pushing.
he's off the lawyers.
Oh yeah, there was a tremendous amount of pressure along the way, but the sense of achievement then, a lot of the sense of achievement was in the actual getting to the incompatibility with European, because people had sort of tried that in other ways and felt that they didn't have access without a real adversarial system. And sometimes the person involved might have been very well or...
He's waffling. He's getting very old.
Yeah, he's such a waffler. I've literally haven't a clue what he's talking about. I'm like, what the fuck?
Plus years, 1982, I think it probably started, but
I might play some of this, except for the good parts.
I said to Michael and to yourself, I said, am I not the worst person with the most difficult circumstances to take this on? So having achieved it, I suppose I should feel so amazing, but it wouldn't have been without FLAC's actually courtesy of letting me reply the whole time. And if I was accused of something, did you meet George? Were you talking to Professor Gorham? Did you actually go to England? Were you talking to Dr. Royal or Russell in London, and etc.? And I could...
You were confirmed by FLAC.
It's a shy storyteller. Like every Irish guy is brilliant at telling the story, and then listen to this shit, and you're like, what the fuck? Like, it was a mouthful.
And to a certain extent, he is kind of honest in the sense. I think he's maybe a bit of dementia now, but it is quite funny. Yeah.
I mean, what he's saying there is like, I no, flack was the way that I was able to respond to my critics. That
Yeah.
was what I wanted. I wanted to chat. I didn't like people saying things about me and me not being able to reply. That's why in that film we watched, you can see the sort of the filmmaker incorporated that attitude into it by him, by like, having a go at the judge or, disobeying the judge or whatever. Because that is his entire personality, his grievance. Nobody else exists except him and his right to. He completely used flack to just be able to get his response out there and nothing else. And Bill Shipsey is desperate to make it this epic human rights story, and it's just absolutely ridiculous.
It was a very significant victory the second time round when Mr. Justice McKechnie held that Ireland's legislation was incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. You had two other lawyers then representing you. Had Mr. Justice, who's now Mr. Justice Hogan, who's now in the Supreme Court, and you also had Siobhan Phelan.
Yeah, they were both great. I didn't give them enough credit. Yeah.
So at least some of your past lawyers have gone on to better and greater things.
Oh, yeah.
And then just when that happened in 2015, there was also another award for you. You became one of the European Citizens of the Year in recognition of your achievement and in recognition of your bravery.
For commitment to cross-dressing.
Well, I sort of thought in a way that you come from being the total reject of society to meeting important people and being recognized. As our president, Michael D, was so good to me, but just thought of some of the folks in the Magdalen laundries who again were like to repent for their sins for the rest of their life in laundry because they were pregnant out of marriage or, whatever excuse there was. But I remember one woman and she met, I think it was the Taoiseach, and got a nice reception, I think, in the Oireachtas. But she had been sort of, again, like that, with a guilty conscience and left to work away under very austere conditions. And all of a sudden, from that, the contrast was that she was meeting, the Taoiseach, which I felt a little bit like that at times. That, from the ashes.
I mean,
Would anyone? Okay, hold on, sorry, because I think this is where Bill Shipsey says he's like Rosa Parks. Wait a sec.
Ireland has changed enormously over that 30-year period since you've started it. But in another way, Lydia, and you don't perhaps you give yourself enough credit, you were part of that change because there were people like Lydia Foy to challenge the system and to put their head above the parapet. And I know there were awful things written and said and reported about you during that period. The change mightn't have happened. So it does take the Rosa Parks and the Lydia Foys of this world to
Rosa Parks and Lydia Foy's. All right. Who would like to explain for anyone who doesn't understand the context, how insulting is it to have International Women's Day and to have a cross-dresser compare herself to a survivor of the Magdalen laundries and whine about not being invited by the Taoiseach for a luncheon in the Oireachtas? What are the Magdalen laundries?
It's disgusting. It's absolutely shocking. Like, I'd never say anything about the laundries like as a fella, like sees a fella too. Like, I'd never say I compare myself to them. No matter if you threw me off a cliff, I wouldn't be going on like as someone who was locked up for having a baby and having my baby taken off me and sold. No. He's a disgrace. And then the Rosa Parks reference, I wouldn't let him on a bus. I literally let him sit down. You wouldn't be getting on. I'd be going past that stop.
It's so wild. I just have to laugh at it. Like, the Magdalen laundries were places where Irish women were sent when they were pregnant, when they weren't married, and they had to basically give up their babies and just work hard labor and lose their children because it was so disgraceful and so shameful. So lest it not be clear, that was done to them on the basis of the sex that they are. And here's a cross-dresser comparing himself to those women because he wasn't treated kindly enough by the court system and by the state because he wanted them to pretend he was the sex that he is not. And despite the fact that they paid for your parents paid for his castration operations and his breast implants and his hormones, and he's comparing himself to the victims of the Magdalen laundries on International Women's Day.
Pretty roast And Rosa Parks, like I think the background to Rosa Parks' story is that her act of defiance came after the murder of Emmett Till. Remember, Emmett was a young black boy. He was sent to a predominantly white area. He made the mistake of apparently wolf whistling and he got lynched, tortured. His body was absolutely mutilated, and his mother decided to give him an open coffin so people could see what was done to him. And it was on that basis Rosa Parks said that Emmett Till was in her mind when she made a decision she wasn't going to move. So to compare Lydia Foy, you got everything you wanted apart from fake birth cert.
And I mean, Bill Shipsey brought up the Rosa Parks reference unprompted. And so last February, a year ago, he was in the Irish Times saying, I never got an apology. It would be nice to get one. The trans activist who fought to say for years, sorry?
He got 50 grand from the state after that.
Oh, 50 grand.
Yeah, I think after the state dropped the case, it gave him €50,000 settlement.
Gail did.
No, the state did.
Oh.
Let me just see if I can get the text that's behind the paywall. I'm not paying for it.
He's a big numpty anyway. I'd say that.
Yeah. Look at this.
Oh.
Sorry. So he asks for an apology once or twice a year. And that's why I kind of watch him so closely, because I'll fucking burn something down if he gets an apology. He'll get a statue of himself in Mullingar Town Centre when he dies, because everyone's still pretending he's a civil rights hero. But so he keeps asking for an apology. And I just saw on LinkedIn, Bill Shipsey wrote, I'm very grateful to Lydia Foy for her generous shout out in the Irish Times interview yesterday. I was but one of a team of lawyers who worked on the case over a period of nearly 2 decades. Solicitors Mary Johnson, she's your one who tipped them off that this could be a STEAM winner. Maureen Maguire Gorley, Moira Shipsey, must be his wife, Rena Corbett, Eleanor Emmon, blah, blah, blah. Big bunch of people. And then said, and now he's Mr. Justice this, and now she's Mrs. Justice that. Sometimes it takes a village of lawyers to achieve justice. My admiration for Lydia's fortitude and courage, and gratitude to my fellow lawyers who worked tirelessly for her case. #justice, #human rights, #trans rights. And that's from a man who knows what Lydia Foy is like.
Yeah, but he's just obviously full of himself and he wants all the credit for a load of waffle as well, because the whole thing is a load of waffle. All this shite is, to be honest. The two of them are wafflers,
Nonsense. Yeah.
surrounded by wafflers and people that are too thick to just say no.
And Irish people have been fed the sad Lydia story for decades now.
I know.
I think the reality is that, like, imagine wasting your life on this and being awarded for being a human rights icon or activist. Like, I'd actually, no. It's depressing.
And can you imagine his ex-wife and daughters watching this now?
Yeah. And I was almost going to say at the beginning, like, I would like to dedicate this snide watch party bitch fest to the ex-wife and daughters of Lydia Foy. But I don't know, like, their relationship could be good now. I mean, I doubt anyone could have a relationship with that man because he's in such a deep relationship with himself. But I wonder, to what extent do those women dislike us online all the time, bringing up the fact that Lydia Foy is a chancer and an autogynephile. You know what I mean? I wonder how they feel about it all, essentially, is all I'm saying.
Well, if someone's talking shit about my man on the internet, I'd be in there, So they haven't said a word. I'd say they'd probably agree with us.
Yeah, now my understanding is the girls did very well. They've gone on to have children. They've had a good life. I would love to hear the take on the whole thing, but no, I don't think we ever will.
Yeah, no, that's understandable.
No, I think there was contact with some of Foy's family, the grandmother, I believe. So there was some contact there, but no, I don't believe they've had any contact with the father since the court case.
Those poor women. I do feel for them also because the daughters are basically my age. So I picture myself in their situation and just seeing him out there, because they bring him up. They just keep dragging him back into the news. And I mean, I know this now because I'm sort of an activist, a turf activist, but every movement benefits from being able to pluck out from, somebody who's affected by the law you're trying to change or whatever, So like in the UK, the Darlington nurses and Sandy Peggy and Maya Forsyth and stuff, and humanize the people behind the legislation that you think is, not good and you want to change or whatever. And so in Malta, there was a kid who was put front and center of the self-ID campaign. In Sweden, there was a teenage trans mask girl who was put front and center. So every country, the bigger countries had more than one, but often you'd have like one mascot for trans. And we got Lydia Foy. Like,
That is just so sad.
I know. And I mean, he's no Jazz Jennings, you know?
No, he isn't. He looks like, did you ever see Insidious, the thing that possesses the dart through the mirror? That's like thinking he's sitting there like a little sock puppet.
But like in a way, like he's just this sad little old man, you know. But at the same time, he just continues to do damage. He's such an unsympathetic character. Like I don't know what they think they're at.
And you do wonder, he's 79 this year. I mean, the first time I saw him was in the flesh. It was I think it was last October, as one of the women outside the IHREC.
Oh, yeah,
And you,
they rated him then as well. How did he look?
when he walked by with David Phillips, it was interesting because when Phillips saw us, the snarl of rage on his face was actually quite scary. I was wearing sunglasses, we couldn't see it, but Foy just looked very. I really don't think Foy's with it completely. Foy just looked a bit blockhead and wandered on by. But I think he played his mouth organ later during the proceedings.
Oh, he sings here a bit now as well. Can I play it to the end and I'll cut out the boring bits after, but we just see what else he says in case there's some good stuff.
He's
So,
ultrasound, isn't there?
say what?
There's a bit about an ultrasound somewhere.
To make change happen.
Make change happen. This is
This,
such
uh,
NGO
this
speak.
Miova.
Fuck off.
We could talk for hours, I know. But looking back on the sort of 30 years and, what you set out to do and what you've achieved, if you were back in 1993 and you knew all that was going to be involved, would you do it again?
Well, no, rien, je ne regrette rien. And I felt like that question, I don't think I had as much choice as you realize, because I really waited until I was very unwell before I got treatment in the first place. And then I did try everything, compromise, whatever, to take on. That was the only redress I had. So I can't say there was any other road open to me. Like I know I had to try and know something about the law and try and understand this adversarial system, or I still don't quite get that it should have been applied to the degree it was, considering it wasn't like a criminal case. It was a case for looking at.
He is like a granny though, in the way that like he gets stuck on a thing and just like start going on about it, and you're like, that's not what we were talking about. Like here he is, just going off on one. His mind is wandering.
The books of law, let's put it in Ireland, in relation to Europe and human rights, etc. But some of that was very tough and rough. I was sent to a public clinic for a transvaginal ultrasound, and I was the only non-pregnant woman in the waiting there for that. And then they wouldn't just say my GP, and I had to go up to the COOM, and all of this sort of thing went on. And then
I had to go up to the COOM, the women's hospital, for you. It must have been so validating.
But then when the system meant that I didn't have immediate access to his report, and then they look at others, so that there were so many, let's say, cards up the sleeve of let's say, the government side or the opposition side or whatever. I don't know how diplomatically to put it, but to the other parties, they seem to have all of the trump cards. And if you wanted to be made insecure, there were lots of ways they could do it,
Ultimately, you triumphed. And what would you say to the next Lydia Foy? Obviously, you've fought and won the battle on behalf of the transgender community, but what would you say to the next young Lydia Foy coming up in terms of trying to achieve social change through the courts or through a battle that you had? What would you say to them?
I always said, even if you can't afford it, try and get a photocopy or keep original documents. And people, they're trying to put you down. Very often they are arrogant, or what should I say? They will make mistakes. They have some inadequacy that means that they have to try and change your life or change, society as it treats you. So, but to where possible, don't delegate. Come and tell your own story, because if you're relying
He's waffling
on somebody who
Yeah, if anyone gave me that advice, I'd just Start crying. I'd be like, this is as good as it gets.
different version of the true circumstances. So, as much as possible, try and hold on to good friends and try and, hopefully inform in the best, nicest, gentlest way you can family. But now I'm glad to say with the new organizations and the new presence of Tenny and all of these organizations within the gay and the full community there,
The
that
full community.
working parents are encouraged nice and gently to come in and see what it's all about. And as you say, the world won't collapse immediately if, you don't have to lock somebody in the shed anymore in case your family will be embarrassed. That diversity is there, and it's always been there. But
it's now recognized.
It's now recognized. Stay on the track, Lydia.
in law, there isn't a given stick to beat people with, if you know what I mean.
I say it took so many attempts for you to get his birth cert because they didn't know what the fuck he was talking about.
This,
I'd be like, get out on me porch, like you're wasting my time. That's probably it though. And these people probably didn't even know what you wanted. Like the whole list that you gave them, the gender thing was at the bottom. They probably were like, what's this shopping list? Like get the dog out or something. Like I don't think his list made any sense. That's why they couldn't help him or anything.
But the thing about it is, when they say about a young Lydia Foy, there's nothing about this. When I was reading the judgment, it struck me, at least, well, there's so much to criticise about the judgments. One thing they did recognise was the impact of the transition on his daughters. Can you imagine now a young Donald Foy coming up? I mean, he'd probably be going tampon shopping with his daughters and borrowing their clothes and praised as a hero. That's one of the worst legacies
Right.
of him.
That's the question, though. Like, that's a huge question because if Lydia Foy was around, like, was 16 years old today, he'd tune out on Reddit with his mate. He'd find a new community and he would never marry. He would never, what's her name? Anne Foy?
Yes.
They would never have had kids. This wouldn't have happened. So one of the consequences of like us shit talking AGPs all the time online is that it makes them ashamed and not come out and end up marrying these women. This is one of the arguments I get all the time. So what's the better outcome? Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it was a different time. But back then, you just sort of had to get married and have kids. And he was attracted to women, and that was fine. And a lot of these AGPs, their attraction to their wives sort of staves off their autogynephilic feelings for a long time, and then they eventually tune out. What is a better scenario? Like at some point, we're going to have to figure out a way to deal with what seems like lots and lots of men who have this inclination, because we don't want more Anne Foy's ex-wives and daughters. Do you know what I mean? So I don't really know what the solution is, honestly.
Well, you can't make decisions on those kind of philosophical things. I don't think. I think it has to be very like this legal. Gender recognition act is causing issues in this area, and then when you go off into but if we don't give them self ID, they might marry someone and repress it, and then that person could end up abused. I think that just gets a little bit too philosophical about it, because we know, when these men enter women's sports and everything, it's harmful there. It's harmful when they go into spaces that they don't belong in, like Barbie Kardashian in a women's prison. Like, we know that's going to happen. That's going to keep happening. There's proof. Look at other countries that have it.
Yeah, I would never argue for recognizing them as women in any capacity, administrative, legal, social, whatever. But it is true that it was the shame of what they were, and also trying to mask up. Like, you see a lot of these men they do a lot of masculine type things to try and not for this thing not to express itself and not to manifest itself. And it doesn't work forever, and they all eventually tune out. And what we're seeing now is those boys all tuning out in their teens, which is horrific to watch. We need to do something about those boys, essentially, is what I'm saying. I mean, who's we? I don't even know who's we, but it's not sustainable. It's like, obviously they can't have our identities. When the society's not going to lie, but something has to be done, because the more shame they feel about it, which they should, because shame is just sort of like a human thing that keeps people in check. When you look in sexology, especially because I'm reading a lot about autism lately, talking about inappropriate behavior. Like, as far as I'm concerned, what these lads are doing is inappropriate sexual behavior, like out in public.
And you do wonder because for years, these guys, well, they stayed in the houses, but from reading, I've read a few biographies. I think Brendan Ryder's one is one of them. And the interesting thing is, once the internet happens, like you had all these men sitting there, but once the internet started connecting them, they realized the whole community out there of them.
Yeah.
And that's where it took off. Mhm.
And what's really interesting about autogynephilia is you hear, like, you have to wonder to what extent you trust sexologists and AGPs themselves. But what seems to be the case is that it's a tendency that they have, and the more they do it, the worse it gets. So they don't start with quote unquote gender dysphoria. They start with just getting off on the clothes, and the gender dysphoria comes later. And why they say, "Oh, I'd be suicidal if I didn't transition," I actually believe them, because they get to a point where it gets so bad, but their obsession gets so bad. That's not an excuse for letting their obsession run wild. Like, there are other sexual proclivities that we absolutely,
Mhm.
do you know what I mean? If a pedophile said, "Oh, if I can't express my sexuality, I'm going to kill myself." Well, that doesn't mean we're going to let you do what you want. You know what I mean? But if Lydia Foy says, it was either, and he has in other interviews, and maybe he's going to say it in this, it was make or break, like it was like, I either do it or I top myself, I either transition. And I believe they're sincere when they say that, like, because it gets so bad. And the thing is that they don't realize is that they're just trying to get relief all the time. They never actually get relief. Like, they never actually get accepted in the way that they want. And it's not our fault. It's not anyone's fault. It's reality just keeps slapping them in the face.
You do wonder as well, look, and I'm not trying to be dismissive, but a lot of it seems to happen when their kids get to be teenage stage, and often and when there's exams going on. Part of it is, I think he was about 1947, he was about 40 when it came to a head. I mean, I think a lot of people also midlife crisis sound very cliched, but you probably do go through a thing in your 40s, you're in a job, you kind of realize what you're not going to do in life, and it can be,
So this is it.
it genuinely is a bit of a turning point. I say that as somebody who's long past 40, you do a bit of a take. And I can imagine, like, I mean, he's in his job it doesn't seem to fulfill him a lot. His kids are teenagers. So yeah. Mhm.
And I understand his wife came from a very well-to-do family, a nice fancy family. You know how true that is. And it was very embarrassing for them, and very embarrassing for his parents and everybody. Like, these men, when they tune out, like, they know that they're going to lose everything, generally.
Yeah. And in fairness, his wife as well, like, I mean, to no fault of her own, like, I think she had to give testimony about their sex life, their adult life.
Oh.
It's absolutely, we're talking about, God, how many years ago? And fair, like, Foy chose to do this. He chose to put himself out there. She didn't.
Yeah. Okay, let's finish the recording. See what we've got. I have a feeling he says something about a very validating experience, and I think it's this one, and it's really disgusting. So it's worth it for this sheer disgust.
Reason why I had to get the birth cert. It sounds illogical, but that was the way, even though they kept on saying, "Oh, it's only a historic document," etc. And you were a selfish bitch to carry on with that. But the true story is that was the only way to have some redress to fairness.
Follow the script.
Joe, I see you've come back into the picture. And is there any sort of final question from UCD that you'd like to put to Lydia? Lydia, just from my perspective, it's great to see you again. It's good to have been in.
Yeah, great. And you did your great work along the way.
It was a great honor to represent you with a lot of other fine lawyers.
I was just going to say, happy Women's Day to everybody, and hello to everyone. I'm useless at social media, so if I'm not in contact with everybody, now's my chance. Thank you all very much for support and understanding, and have a great Women's Day today.
Thank you. I think we're out of time, Rebecca Harley.
There was maybe it was in another interview. It's so nasty. He says when he woke up in the hospital after his gender reassignment surgery, so he basically actually had his nads chopped off, a female nurse walked into the room and got like a fright and did a double take and walked straight back out. And Lydia Foy took that to mean that he was a woman now, and that his womanly modesty was being respected. Whereas, oh, that nurse would have seen this a million times, and if I was a man, she wouldn't have cared, and But he got this validation from this woman coming in and seeing a fucking butchered, castrated man lying there, and just got the shock of her life. And he was like, "Oh, this proves that I'm a woman now," because
I must, if you find it, send it on to me. I won't say I'd love to. I feel obliged to listen to it.
you know what it was actually? I listened to it earlier today. It was before he got his birth cert. It was 2011, and it was called "My Name Is Lydia Foy." It was before podcasts. It was an audio thing. Have you heard it? A lad went to a site and they got sounds of this guinea pig.
And sad classical music and everything. Yes, no, yes, yeah. Mhm.
It's a well-produced piece, but yeah, that's what he was talking about, like getting his bedpan changed or whatever, and the nurse freaked out, and it's just like a very validating experience. So there you go. So there's sort of an alternative view of the Lydia Foy story. I really do recommend watching the other video that I'm going to put in the show notes, which is Know Your Queer History. I think it was made by Shout Out or Belong To or one of the thousands of NGOs. Final thoughts on the scam that is the faking of a sob story of Donald Foy.
It still gets me that ultimately the information about how he treated his wife and children in the background, it's out there in the judgments. It's you don't need to be an absolute genius to go rooting around to find it. If people actually read the backstory. Mhm.
Yeah, and none of the journalists who've written about him multiple times per year for the past 20 years have ever presented that evidence.
No.
There just came a time that it became unmentionable.
Oh yeah, and he could. I mean, it would be a complete lie, but he's well able to lie. He could at least be fair to them and say, if he had a family. No, but it's almost like his life didn't. I think that's actually the most hurtful thing. It's almost like his life didn't exist until he went on his beautiful journey. Especially like it's so much stuff now about, male violence against women and girls, everything. And yeah, he's a prime wife abuser. And to see him faced as a feminine hero is just, it gets my goat.
Yeah, and I think that's why I get so upset about it as well, is that I've been expecting him to die and get a parade, and I was waiting for it. Or I was thinking he might get his apology and his invitation by the new president or something for an apology buffet. And then when I heard about this, I was like, they're still going to milk his story and give him a parade and probably a buffet. Like, how many more kicks in the guts do the women in his former life deserve,
Sometimes you don't know. Maybe when he does depart this planet, people might come out and tell the truth.
I would love that. Like, again, I just, he has his weird autogynetic life, whatever it is that he has that's up with him. I just want people to know, just say, like, these are the facts. Why is Irish media still 20, 30 years just regurgitating the same tired nonsense about this untrue, half-true story? Do we need hero stories so desperately that we have to invent them like this? Are there not enough people doing great things that we have to keep dragging this lad out and pretending that
He
he's
got
some sort of folk hero?
he got another Woman of the Year award from Labour recently, completely out of context, which I can't even imagine. I don't even know what. Mhm.
Why aren't they giving Big Dave, Sarah Phillips, Woman of the Year stuff?
No, sorry, I mean, Foy got a Woman of the Year award from Labour not too long ago. But no context, like whatever by 2015, he was all in the limelight then. But no, I think he got another one recently. Woman of the some female
Does
recognition.
he even know which year it is? Like, that fella's definitely got dementia.
Yeah, he's definitely seen on. Watch the other video; it's even worse, and you can see all this junk in the background that he's been collecting.
Oh, jeez.
You do wonder on day-to-day basis. Like he was a clever man. I mean, like he's never worked. At the end of the day, he lives in a fairly grotty house. Like there's an awful lot he's missed out on grandchildren. Like I mean, you kind of wonder what was it worth it. She seems to think so, but part of it is, I suppose, he's pulled out every now and again as a heroine, which you could never have foreseen when this all started.
The thing is, like I was saying earlier, I believe them when they say make or break. When these men in these groups, when they will be in the worst possible situation, grotty bed sit, homeless, run out of HRT, wounds, like their beard grown back after like thousands of pounds worth of electrolysis. Like in the worst situation, family abandoned them, nobody speaks to them, the parents hate them, kids are scared of them. the worst situation, and they say I still wouldn't change it, I still wouldn't do it. And I believe them. And I know that sounds like, they're just saying that's cope. I think for a lot of them, they go so deep. And as I was saying, like, the more they do it, the worse it gets. So they make the leap and they do the transition and all. It still keeps getting worse. It doesn't stop, and it's harder and harder. They can never go back to their old life. So I really believe them when they say, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't go back. I actually have no regrets. Even though, and they'll say, my life has fallen to absolute shit. Everything is to be 10 times worse. I wouldn't change it because they can't live anymore in that state because they're so, the way I describe it is they scratched so hard that they bled, and they just keep scratching because they don't know what other way to do it. And that's and I think on a certain level, Lydia Foy is pretty special, self-contained, turbo, narcissistic dude. So he's just like, other people don't exist for him anyway. But a lot of these men who are a lot less egotistical in that way, I mean, and people don't like me saying this, but there are a lot of men who have these autogynephilic tendencies who don't go anywhere and don't,
That once they start taking the female hormones and the testosterone reduced, bit of a catch-22, as you said, that the arousal diminishes, female hormones, and then it becomes a whole, it's almost like you need a bigger hit just to get the same level of satisfaction.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. The libido diminishes, and we don't get the hit anymore. And they also, and that's the thing, they develop relationships with themselves. They kind of fall in love with themselves, and they settle into it. Like, you hear Michael Bailey and all talking about this. I used to think it was bullshit, but I really do think that a lot of the autistic types, that is sort of what's going on. They're settled into a romantic and almost asexual relationship with themselves, and they wouldn't have it any other way because they remember how they felt, how desperate they felt. But then there's also a lot of just the transvestite cross-dressers who are just fucking psychopathic horn dogs and creeps and stuff. But this particular type is another type. It's also unscientific. I just like talk about the things that I see on Facebook and Discord and stuff. So I'm saying all these things, but obviously it's highly researched, but I don't really have any grand theories about it all. These are just things I've observed. But thank you both for joining me to chat about this weird old dude. I hope it just adds a little bit of what I think is necessary context to the Lydia Foy sob story. Any last words?
I hope I don't have nightmares about him. And I hope his bus doesn't show up.
I'm sure you will have nightmares about him. All right, folks. Take care.
Take care.
Cheers.
If you like my work, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to peaked.substack.com and taking out a paid subscription.